Hi, I'm Katie Walsh, and I'm so pleased to be here doing a little bit of a conversation Q&A with the amazing writer-director Ekwa Msangi for the film Farewell, Amor. Welcome, Ekwa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here and for talking about this amazing film with us. It is such a lovely piece of work, and I can't thank you enough for talking about it with us today. So I wanted to know about the genesis of this project. I understand that there's a personal connection that you have to this specific story.
Yes, it is personal. It's inspired by the story of an aunt and uncle of mine who were married in Tanzania in the mid 90s. And my uncle got a student visa to come to the US and came with every intention of bringing my aunt and cousin right behind him. And 20 years later, 22 years later, they are still in the process of applying for visas, getting rejections, applying for visas, getting rejections, all the while still hopeful that one day it will happen, it will work. But, it's changed them. And, I've watched it change them and change their family unit and the larger family unit over the years. And so I was curious about the what if story. What if this mountain that they've been climbing forever disappears and auntie gets her visa and she's supposed to show up at the airport? What do we do at this point? Where does one begin if that's no longer the issue?
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about the film is there are these challenges that come up in the relationship, but it's more about them just becoming different people
Yeah.
as you do over the course of almost 20 years. He's got his own interests that he's followed, dancing and socializing, and she's very religious, and it's like these things that have helped them get through this time, but it's also made them grow apart.
Exactly.
That's so interesting. I'm so sorry that your family is still waiting on their visas. I'm sorry to hear that.
It's been interesting because I've found, through showing this film to different audiences that it's a much more common story than I anticipated. There's a lot of people who have been separated by visa issues, maybe not for 17 years, maybe for less, maybe for more, and different configurations. Sometimes it's the parents who come together and they leave the kids behind, or, different ways that it shows up. But and sometimes it's not immigration issues either. I mean, this particular family is immigration visa issues, but for some people it's incarceration. For some people it's um, military service, or just a really hectic work schedule where you're constantly traveling and and only connecting with your family via FaceTime. And so what happens when you're finally back? Um, how are you able to reconnect with these people that you love and supposedly have a relationship with? How easy or hard is that?
Hmm. I wanted to ask about the title of the film because Amor is what Esther calls Walter, and I'm curious now that and that we're chatting. Like, I wonder if the farewell is like where the film starts with them saying goodbye, or because it doesn't really seem like they're saying farewell at the end. So I'm curious why that was the title that you chose.
It was kind of the idea of them saying goodbye to their old selves, saying
Mm,
goodbye to what they thought they knew and who they thought they were. And the crutches that you mentioned, they've developed these crutches as coping mechanisms over the years, as this was the way that they were able to stay hopeful and keep pushing towards this inevitable reunion. And now that the reunion has happened, there is no space for the crutches any longer, or it's crowding the space, what's already a very tiny space. And so having to say farewell to those things in order to make space for new. Yeah, that's what I was thinking with that.
no, I like the title a lot. I know that this was a short film that you originally started out with. Um, at what point did you decide to do the three different storylines, the perspectives and point of view? Was that a part of the short film, or was that something that evolved as you worked on the film and the writing of the feature?
It definitely evolved in the writing of the feature. I knew that I wanted to make the feature from the beginning and had been speaking to my producing partner, Huria Muhammad, about it. And we got a cash grant off of another short film that we had worked on, that required us to make a short film. And so we decided to use that money to make a short prequel and use that as sort of like a calling card, you know, proof of concept for the feature. And in the short, Farewell Meu Amor is the title of the short film. It's the moment before he goes to the airport. So he's at the house and Linda comes to give him the keys and say goodbye. And so when I started working on the feature, that story was freshest in my mind because it's just about Walter and his relationship with Linda. Um, but it felt a little cliche to write a story about a guy who had an affair with some lady and he's juggling, and we've seen that, you know. So I was a little like, all right, well, maybe I'll do it from the daughter's perspective. um and but I was afraid that, especially, you know, in America, films about teenagers dancing tends to automatically get categorized as like the dance movie. You know, this year's sort of Save the Last Dance or whatever sort of
Yeah.
pop movie it is, and I didn't want it to be categorized as that. So a little bit indecision wise, I decided, well, let me do both of their stories and see what happens. And so I initially started making it from Walter and Sylvia's perspective only. And about 6 to 8 months into the process, it became kind of clear that Esther's story was the linchpin for both of theirs, and it wouldn't make sense to have the story without Esther's story. And so I went back and incorporated her story, and that felt really gratifying to sort of actually really look at her, and not just dismiss her as like this annoying pesky woman who's having issues that she should just get over or something like that, but to really, you know, to really like look at, you know, the fact that it's one event, right? All of them are like the reunion, and it's this yay euphoric moment where it feels kind of like we're done, we've reached the pinnacle.
Right.
But it's not, you know, it's really just the beginning. And even though all of them are participating in this one event, they're all having very different experiences of the one event. um, and so wanting to really look at what everyone's experience and, you know, from their angle is of this one event, to me just seemed really, really intriguing.
Yeah, I think that incorporating the Esther storyline, it really changes how we view her as a character and humanizes her so much. And I felt her anxiety just, wondering about the mail and trying to figure out where to get the things that she needs in this new place. And it's almost as if your film, it's the end of another film. So if the end of the other film was like, yes, we achieved it, we're together again, this
Yeah,
now becomes, okay, now what happens after that, after the happy ending and all the
right.
complications that arise from that. I also wanted to ask about the casting because the three leads are so amazing. And I know this is Jamie Lawson's first film. She plays Sylvia, and her next film is going to be The Batman with Robert Pattinson. So, pretty good resume so far for her. How did you find her?
She came through casting. She came
Hmm.
through casting. I mean, Sylvia was the first character that we cast for because we
Oh,
were most worried about who are we going to find that could do all the things that we needed her to do the accent, do the dancing, be convincing as a young person, but be older. Um, and so our casting director, Rebecca Deely from Christie Street Casting, found her amongst a number of women. And we had, you know, it was a fairly lengthy process. They came in and read the parts, and then they came in later and worked with the choreographer so we could see the dancing aspects too. And she just completely blew us away. I mean, she's so striking, not just in terms of like her beauty and her features, but just like even as a performer, she's so unique and striking. And it was just like, I mean, why wouldn't we take her? She's incredible. Will you take us? Is more
right,
of the question. And so she came through casting. Esther, you know, played by Zainab Jah, plays the character Esther, and she's somebody who's, I've seen her work in a lot of New York theater performances. She's done both on and off Broadway. And she just came in and just with so much ease and so much grace was able to just capture so many different layers of the character, even just in, the 20-minute little audition that we had in casting. So it was kind of a no-brainer to work with her. And I've seen her work on theater. She's so powerful. And for Ntari, he's actually a friend. He's a filmmaker in his own right, and we've had our short films travel together at different festivals, and had met. And he's also from East Africa. He's from Uganda, and so we have always, threatened to work together for several years, and have been looking for the project that we could work on together. And so when this opportunity came up, I invited him to, take on this role, and he was so gracious. And all three of them, I mean, all of the actors, but certainly, the three leads just really gave every ounce of their being, to these characters, and really sort of embodying, what I had written on the page, and bringing it to life in a way that I couldn't even have imagined.
Yeah, it's such an amazing trio of performances working together, and everyone was amazing. They are all so radiant and beautiful in this film, and I'm wondering what your creative approach to the camera, the cinematography, the lighting, shooting in Brooklyn, like what was your goal in mind that you wanted to achieve? Like, I want this to be kind of dreamy and beautiful, or to capture a sense of place. What was your creative sort of filmmaking approach to how the film looks?
Yeah, I mean, that I definitely had a wonderful collaborator in my director of photography, Bruce Francis Cole, who came on kind of at the last minute, really, and just, dived in full throttle. And we spent a lot of time talking about, for me, talking about the story, and talking about the mood and the feel that I wanted to capture, and wanting to capture New York and Brooklyn in particular as a character in the film as well. Um, a character seen from the perspective of these people, of this community, which we don't often get to see reflected on film, the African immigrant community. Um, but also wanting to make each of their chapters very unique, in terms of what we're saying with the camera. Um, and so for each of them, we had sort of like a different influence. For Walter, we were thinking about sort of slow cinema, Wong Kar Wai, and some other influences like that. And where we capture him, a lot of his shots are sort of in between two surfaces, two spaces, if it's a window or doorway or something. Again, also speaking to him being caught between these two spaces, Linda and Esther, Linda and family, um, and where we really just kind of spend time sort of contemplating what his inner world is. With Sylvia, she's alive, she's lively, she's action packed, she's out in the streets, and she's restless in a way. So hers was all handheld. And saw a lot of movement with her, in a way that we didn't have for Walter. His didn't have any movement. And then for Esther, she's sort of taking all this information in, and she's observing, and she's, checking everything out. And so we did a lot of lens changes, and, really sort of zeroing in on a lot of specifics, and sort of wanting to create sort of like a tactile experience for her character, and then sort of trying to bring it all together in the last little epilogue chapter, to summarize, I guess, for all of them. So it was a really wonderful experience working with Bruce. I really loved it, and I think he did an incredible job. And above all, just wanting it to be just gorgeous, and just melanin fest from wall to wall. And I think you did a great job achieving that.
You guys did a great job. It was everyone. I was just sort of speechless at how beautiful everyone was, and also that Brooklyn was so palpable, and I recognized those streets and those people, and I loved the casting of Joy Lee.
Yeah.
Also gives a connection to great Brooklyn films like Do the Right Thing, and her character. I almost felt like I knew her, and so can you talk a little bit about how Joy got involved?
Yeah, she was, oh my God, such a love. I mean, Spike Lee is such an inspiration for me, as he is for many filmmakers. And and specifically, my love for Brooklyn came largely through watching a lot of Spike's films. When we were casting for that part, um, I don't know if I had specifically said it in the script, but a lot of the women that we saw were much younger. It's kind of played younger or were actually younger, and it just wasn't quite landing in the way that we wanted it to. And my casting director was kind of like, have you considered somebody slightly older? And what do you think of somebody like Joie? And I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
aside from just me being such a fan of her work, it was actually really wonderful to see them together because, just like the idea of them actually being peers, and being able to sort of her being able to mentor Esther in a way that a younger woman wouldn't be able to do, but also being this older, sort of sensual, sexy, vivacious, lively Brooklyn woman. And there's if you've been to Brooklyn, like Joie is Brooklyn, first of all.
Yeah.
But that character does actually exist.
Oh
There's many Nzingas in Brooklyn, and she was so wonderful. She brought so much, not only of herself, but literally, artwork and costume, and like really like spent a lot of time talking about that character and what it is that we wanted to convey with her. So I'm so just honored that she worked with us.
She was amazing. And I love that her opening scene is her sort of like breaking up with someone on the phone. And this is too much Aries energy. It was very, I was like, oh, I know her. Like this person is real. um, so also I wanted to talk about the music and the soundtrack, which I thought was incredible. The music supervision, the selection of songs from the mixes that she's getting from Nima back in Tanzania, and um, the songs that the score and all of the things that that Walter is listening to. So did you have what was your approach to sort of building the score and the soundtrack together to create music that isn't just a great part of the film, but like really tells a story,
Right.
and tells the rest of the story in the film for us.
Yeah, as a kizomba, semba, kuduro dancer, there's, my first stop as far as the music, the pre-recorded music that we used were just all of my favorites and all of my favorite artists, and kind of stalking them and seeing who we could afford and who
Yeah.
would respond to our Instagram stalking messages. Um, and it was wonderful. Like, a lot of people actually were very excited about working with us, and we did a lot of Google translating, because most of them speak Portuguese, and we don't. But really just explaining to them what the story was. And I wanted, um, I mean, as I was writing the script and as I was writing each character, because of the importance of music in the film, I had created playlists for each character. And so I would listen to their playlists as I was writing that particular character. And so I had an idea of the kind of music that I wanted to feature for each of them, what kind of moved them, so to speak. Um, and then needing to balance that out with the score. And I worked with a wonderful music composer, Osei Essed, who we spent a lot of time again talking about the characters and the story and what it is that I wanted to convey, and showed him the music that we were using, that was from pre-recorded artists. And so trying to find a balance that wasn't too melancholy but wasn't too much energy at the same time, and was at least a little bit hopeful, and the kind of speaking to their emotions at the parts that we sprinkled it in, and not wanting it to be too musicy either,
Mhm.
because we already had quite a bit of music. But he did a wonderful job in being able to complement what we were getting, from all the other Angolan artists, and just also being very specific. There was at one point where my music supervisor sent me a song to consider that was actually a Swahili song, and I speak Swahili, and I so I could understand what they were singing in the song, and it was completely inappropriate for the piece. And so, but it's a really nice tune, and I was like, oh, I actually need to be very careful about what the singers are saying in this. Like it's not enough to just like enjoy the beat and the melody. And so, working with our choreographer Manuel Kanza, who's Angolan, and ended up being a consultant for all so many things, including the music. I would send him all of the tracks and ask him specifically what are they talking about in this music. And it was really interesting. Like a lot of, like the one song that, she sings in the taxi with her dad when he's playing the song and she sings along to it,
Hmm.
was probably the one track that I had kind of done some research and found that particular singer and wanted to use it. It's very mournful and beautiful, but I didn't actually know how specific it was. And in that song, the singer, his name is Bonga, is talking about it's a father lamenting to his child for leaving his child behind. And it was just like, oh my God, this is so perfect. So wanting to make sure that, for anyone who did understand the
Hmm.
lyric to the songs, that it would actually make sense in that way as well, because, the music gives a whole other layer of information. And especially for people who have been in exile or who are away from home, doesn't have to be exile, but who are immigrants who are away from home, away, and whether it's abroad in another country or even in another state, another town, music is such a connector. It's such a reminder. It's such a, it's how you teach your kids about like, oh, when I was your age, this is the thing that I used to, and and it can take you back to a very specific, where you can smell things, because of how powerful it is. And so wanting to be really specific about the music that we selected from it. So we did a lot of research and a lot of stalking, and,
Hmm.
and came up with what we got.
I love that attention to detail because it speaks to such a wider audience than just an American or English speaking audience. So I think that's really important for a film like this to speak to a global audience or an audience of diaspora. So I think that's fascinating. I wanted to finish up with one last question about the dancing, which I love her performance at the end because I think it is about her dancing, but it's also just about her expression and then her expression being sort of accepted and held and what she says at the end to her parents, which is just like they loved it or they liked it.
Yeah.
And so but her dancing was very specifically African and different from what the other dancers were doing. So what was your approach to the dance scene? I loved that it sort of took place in this like, we're not on a traditional stage. I wasn't sure if it was going to be like up on a stage like a recital but then they're in this sort of like, circle and people are jumping in. So how did you come around to like how you presented the dance and the working with the choreographer and the actress to express this moment that's so important for her?
Yeah, I mean, kuduro, which is the style of dance that she performs, is actually is the purpose. How kuduro came around is from like young Angolan people needing a platform to express themselves and not really having a whole lot of space in society to say the things that ail them or bother them or excite them or whatever. And for this character in particular, who's like a young African girl, who wouldn't have the permission to throw a tantrum, for example, or
Right.
mouth off to her parents, like that would never happen. So the only way that she could really express herself is through movement and music. And so I thought that would be a really wonderful tool for her, almost like a third language for her to be able to use. I'd seen videos of different dance ciphers. I mean, I do social dancing, but not the kind of like underground scene that we created for her. But I have seen some sort of ciphers and dance competitions, and sort of that circle, you know, layout. So I knew that we wanted that. And we worked with Jamie. We had a choreographer who's from Angola, who's an incredible dancer. His name is Manuel Kanza, and he worked with Jamie for 2 hours every day for about 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
and choreographed all of her movement, and also the movements, the dance performances of the other two dancers who were at the cipher. Um, and yeah, and then I mean, that was definitely the largest scene that we shot. That and the dance club with Walter were the two largest scenes that we shot for the film. But it was really exciting to have that much energy in the one
Mhm.
space, and they performed it over and over again.
Yeah.
I think she did it about 5 times, poor thing. But just had the right amount of energy, and also her ability to she understood the importance of that dance, and that movement, and wanted to make it as authentic as possible, so she worked her ass off to do it, and she did an incredible job.
And it's really also acting the dance and
Yeah.
not just doing the dance. I mean, she acts it beautifully because you start to see this very reserved person kind of come out of her shell and blossom. Did Manuel also choreograph the dance club scene? I loved the dance club scenes too.
Yes, he did. And that was such an important scene for me for this film, because for me that was the moment where we get to really see Walter. He's very polite and he's very reserved for most of it, and that's the one place where we see him open up in a very different way. And I
Hmm.
wanted to show what dance does for him, and specifically dancing with Linda, who's been his partner, his dance partner, but his partner for many years, and where that takes him. And that dance in particular, kizomba, is again, also a very significant style. It's from Angola. It's a very beautiful sensual couples dance, and unlike other couples dances like a salsa or bachata, kizomba does not have a regular foot pattern to it. So you actually do really need to focus, and because you don't know what's going to happen. The leader of the dance is responding to the music, and if you're the follower, you're just responding to what the leader is doing. And so you have to have a certain amount of connection in
Hmm.
order to perform the dance, otherwise there is none. And I just thought that was a really interesting metaphor for a relationship, for this couple that used to dance, that used to be in sync, and now they're not. And therefore they're not able to have the relationship that they want, until they get back into sync with each other, and just wanting, like, also for them to use that as a little bit of a language or a metaphor for what they're experiencing in their relationship life.
It's amazing how dance it can be such a language, and it's clear that there's such deep meaning to the different dances that you used in the film. So I love that. I love dance films and I love dance. So it's amazing to learn about it.
Yeah.
But we have to end the conversation here. But thank you so much for chatting about this film and for bringing this film to us. It's beautiful. And this was delightful to talk to you and learn more about the background and what was going on in it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me and for watching the film.
Thank you.